In this presentation, we're looking at the arguments against the marketing of organs by James Childress. And Childress begins with some statistics that are relevant just to give us more of a background as we consider this issue of organ donation and having money for people who donate. About 29,000 people a year receive organ transplants, and about 6,500 a year die while waiting for a transplant that then can't take place because of a shortage of donated organs. Those statistics are somewhat dated and on a trajectory of increasing, so it's more likely that that number is about 7,000 people die waiting for transplants each year. Now, survival after donations has been improving significantly, and as of May in 2009, the percentage of recipients who were still living 5 years after their transplant is pretty good. And we can see these specifically for kidneys. Almost 70% are surviving after 5 years. For heart transplants, nearly 75%, so a very good rate there. For liver transplants, again, pretty strong with nearly 74% survival after 5 years. And for lungs, not quite as good, but we do see more than half, about 54%, survive after 5 years of receiving the transplant. Now, keep in mind, these people who receive transplants were in dire need of this organ before they had the transplant. So they were in really bad shape and most likely would have died very soon if they had not received the transplant. But you can see this pretty good rates. So our process of transplantation is pretty good. We're getting better and better. Survival rates are continuing to improve. You can see on this chart here, the waiting list is in gray. Over time, it continues to increase with over 100,000 people waiting for an organ. You can see that the transplants, however, have tapered off or rather plateaued some. And in 2009, 28,000 plus a bit were receiving transplants. And then you see on the bottom the number of donors, which again has somewhat plateaued at about 14,600. And you might, if you are looking at these numbers, have a question, wait a minute, there are more transplants than donors. And that's because, of course, for some donors, cadaveric donors, you can harvest more than one organ and perform more than one transplant. We talked about the distinction between moral principles and legal principles earlier, and that they do not overlap entirely. So something might be moral but illegal, or immoral but legal, etc. And an immediate concession of Childress is that buying or selling organs is not always morally wrong. So in some cases, Childress allows that buying and selling organs might be morally permissible. So on the moral side, he does not go through the details on when and why and how it might be morally permissible, but he says this concession that it might be. Instead, though, he's focusing on the public policy side, the legal side of whether we should allow the transplant of organs for monetary gain for those who are donating. He argues that we have really strong reasons not to allow the marketing of organs, not to allow the commodification of organs, as a term that he often uses, from the living or from cadavers, either one. And he provides three different reasons not to allow commodification. One is based in justice. If you recall, Burroughs considered a reason not to allow commodification based in justice, So Burroughs acknowledged that this might be a potential problem. Childress thinks it is a very significant problem, and that one immediate result, if there were general permission for buying and selling organs, is that the exchanges themselves would be unfair. They would be unfair because the wealthy would be the recipients and the organs would come from the poor, those more likely to need or desire money from donating. Now, Childress says with government regulations, a clearinghouse of sorts, something like that, these concerns about justice could possibly be overcome. However, there is that lingering concern. It's hard to overcome the idea that those who are going to donate are more likely to be those who are poor. Wealthy would not have that monetary motivation to donate. Now, on the flip side, Childress considers reasons why we might allow the commodification of organs. And he argues that the best argument on that other side is for allowing marketing is based on utilitarian principles. So he says, look, the reasons anyone might provide for allowing buying and selling of organs are based on just utility, promoting the greatest happiness for the greatest number. So the sale of organs might increase the supply and allow more people to live who otherwise would have died. So we saw the statistics, almost 7,000 people a year dying because they did not receive organs, even though they were on the waiting list. And the idea would be you allow commodification, and this would bring in more organs into the transplant system, and more people would survive. But Childress disagrees with this argument. In fact, so he takes the utilitarian concern, and this is actually his second point in terms of not allowing. Our first point was the concern about justice. The second point here, he argues against these utilitarian arguments. And instead, he claims that marketing would not be effective, and it may be counterproductive. So it would not be of good utility. In fact, it might actually be bad to do it. So in order to think through this, what Childress does is he considers alleged reasons why people do not donate according to the utilitarian argument. So the utilitarian argument says people don't donate for certain reasons. First, they might be a bit unsure if that's what they want. They just haven't thought it through yet, so they're hesitant. Second is they just don't want to think about it. If you start seriously considering somebody taking your kidney or lungs or heart after you died and those being put in somebody else's body, it's not a pleasant thing to think about for many people. And so they just don't want to think about it, and they don't end up wanting to donate. And then finally, it's inconvenient to sign a donor card. The idea that Burroughs raised, and recall that Burroughs addressed this issue by saying, well, you could get around it by presumed consent laws. And he did think that this is a reason why people don't donate, and provided a response to that. Now those, according to Childress, are the alleged reasons people don't donate, the ones that are used in a utilitarian argument for donation. On the flip side, why people do not donate, Childress looks at research, at statistics, and he says the actual reasons people do not donate are different from the ones that the utilitarian argument points to. And so what the actual reasons, one of them is fears that their organs would be taken before they died due to being declared dead prematurely. So the idea here is that somebody might be afraid that, well, they're a donor and maybe they've been in an accident, and there are people waiting for organ transplants, and so somebody thinks, well, this person's probably not going to make it, let's just declare them dead and go ahead so we can get those organs. Another concern would be that fears of having one's death hastened by those anxious to get the organs. Here it's a little different. It's not just declaring somebody dead prematurely, it's actually causing a death so that the organs could be transplanted, maybe thinking about timing and the need to get those organs quickly. And so nefarious people might even cause the death by maybe by not providing support or maybe by doing something actively. And those are the actual concerns that people have, says Childress, and those fears would intensify if there was money involved. And so both of those fears, the idea of somebody being willing to pay money, and somebody there is there with a lot of money saying, get me those organs, that might intensify the fear. So as a result, Childress argues there might actually be fewer donations if marketing were allowed. So the utilitarian argument fails, according to Childress, and it actually might bring about bad results if we allowed the marketing of organs. So we've seen the argument from justice, the argument from utility, and the third reason that Childress provides for not allowing commodification is that the commodification of bodies and organs could lead us to treat those purely in instrumental terms. So the idea here is you start thinking of a person's kidney as $50,000 or something like that. You look at a healthy person in an accident and you start adding up the money from the various organs, and that result would be damaging to our social values. It would also lead to a reduction in altruism. In other words, people might be less willing out of the goodness of their heart to donate because they would think, well, somebody could just buy an organ if they really needed it. And then finally, a fourth reason here is that we might not want to allow commodification is that, and I don't really consider this a fourth reason, I'm putting it as a fourth reason, but we could make our current system more effective. So this is kind of an alternative to allowing commodification. Maybe we could expand the salvaging of organs to those who are dead on cardiopulmonary standards instead of being brain dead, Childress suggests. And that might allow more organs to be put into the system. Maybe another possibility that he suggests, again, as an alternative here, is that a demonstration of gratitude by those who are donors. So have society contribute up to $1,000 toward funeral expenses for those who donate organs. It would not necessarily cover a funeral, but it would be a token of gratitude. In conclusion, Childress' view is that the social risk of commodification, the way that we would start to look at people and organs would be problematic. The potential for coercion, for hastening somebody's death or declaring a death too soon, the potential for exploitation are just simply too great to allow the marketing of organs. So as a public policy, Childress says we should not do it. Now, what criticisms might be raised? Well, here's a question. Are there any problems with children making the suggestion to use cardiopulmonary standards to determine death? That should just be CP there. Cardiopulmonary standards to determine death. Any problems with that? Well, wait a minute. What did he say about the fears and the reasons people don't donate? Wouldn't that increase fears already identified as problematic? In other words, when somebody's declared dead on cardiopulmonary standards, well, maybe they could be revived and survive just fine if CPR were given. And one of the fears was that you would hasten somebody's death or declare somebody dead too soon. Well, this would simply encourage people to declare somebody dead too soon. It seems like that might be a problem. And then second, are utilitarian concerns, the best ones or the only ones provided by those in favor of marketing, such as Burroughs. So Childress suggests that utility arguments, those that say this is going to be good, that's the best and the only argument that those who are for the marketing of organs provide. Is that the case? And the answer is no, right? For Burroughs, his main argument and the first argument was simply autonomy, and politically libertarian grounds allow people to do what they want to do. And both people, if they both are willingly participating in the process, then we should let them do it. So Childress doesn't really address that. He may have good arguments against it, but it doesn't seem to be one that he is fully engaged in.